Welcome to Psyched for Psychology, a Nystrom & Associates podcast. Our hosts, Michelle Iverson and Brett Cushing, are both licensed marriage and family therapists at Nystrom & Associates. Each week, they talk about all things mental health and therapy, and you get a chance to dive into specific psychology topics that help promote personal development and wellness. And now, here are your hosts, Michelle and Brett.
Welcome back for another episode of Psyched for Psychology. Thank you for joining us today, and we are very excited to have another wonderful guest in our traveling studio because today we are in Edina. We are meeting with Edina's clinic director, Scott Steinbarger. He is a self-described Midwestern millennial middle child. He's always had an interest in counseling. He did nuclear engineering in college before figuring out marriage and family therapy was just the ticket. He is a self-described nerd who loves storytelling and story listening even more. He is passionate about relationships, does a lot of great work working with couples and individuals through challenges and goals. We are really excited because Scott has got a background in, sounds like reading fantasy novels, pretending to be a writer.
Pretending,
Scott?
absolutely.
And we are so excited because what we're doing today was actually Scott's idea, and we loved it. We loved it so much. We wanted to do an entire podcast episode and have Scott on to help us out with it.
Love that. Yes, we are going to be doing Mythbusters today. It's like we need bumper music now, like dun dun dun, Mythbusters. And Scott, we're delighted to have you with us today on the podcast. What myths in particular are you going to help us bust up today?
So today we're going to be busting up all the myths on counseling. So just all the different kind of things that people, maybe preconceived notions and ideas that they have as they come into it. And they think, okay, well, I don't think I could ever do counseling, or this is what I've heard, or what do they really get up to in that room? So we're going to be just kind of, the idea behind it is, how can we find a way to kind of create a little bit more of a comfort, or to alleviate some of those preconceived notions so that people can feel comfortable about, accessing care without having the wrong idea.
Love that, because what I've heard, and I don't know if you guys have heard this, I don't know how to fact check this, but I've heard it more than a couple times. The average number of times somebody comes to therapy, do you guys know?
I actually don't.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. This is what I've heard. I heard -1. Now, I know you guys are looking at me like, come on, seriously. But it takes into account how many times people schedule and don't come in. And because it takes a lot of courage. And in addition to that courage to come into therapy, there's all these myths that get in the way, these preconceived notions about counseling, about therapy, etc. So I'm really hoping that as we go through this will help people get beyond those myths and be able to get into therapy and realize, hey, this is great. This is a game changer for me. So, Scott, we're delighted to have you here.
Yeah, man. Happy to be here.
Good. So let's think about some of these myths. I pulled together a list for all of us to kind of talk through and think about and be able to bust for those listening today. Let's go with the first one. This one I actually hear from a lot of people who've never been to therapy before or don't work in the field. So a person who needs to go to therapy, they need to go for years and years and years, even forever. What do we think about that myth?
Absolutely true. Absolutely. So it's... It is, of course, not true. It can be true if you would like to go for therapy for years and years and years, depending. Sometimes that can be an option. But no, it's very much the length of time that you go to therapy is absolutely mediated by what the actual need is. And so I think that, kind of behind that, there's sort of like a dual purpose sort of concern. And the one would be, all right, if I open up this can of worms, I'm never going to finish. This is going to be an ongoing thing. It's never going to be fixed. It's not going to be something that we're able to actually address. And it's just going to take forever.
Yeah.
Or, on the other hand, it would be, okay, once they get a hold of me, they're never going to get their hooks out of me. And so I think that's kind of the thought behind it, is that people have this sort of, there's nothing that can be done. It's never ending. So I might as well just not even start. So let's just not bother. Or that, there's certain professions, I'm not going to pick on them, that are maybe less regulated, where it is perhaps an actual thing where you go and then you kind of establish this maintenance mode where you don't actually necessarily solve anything, but you go in and they help you to feel better, and then you leave and it comes back, and then you just kind of repeat that process. So we're not going to name unregulated services, but there are things that yes. can operate like that. So I think the idea behind, it's going to take forever, how long does it actually take? It's something that I think, what I would want for people out there to know is that it's very much a collaborative process. It's something that your provider, your therapist, and then you as a client, you're going to be working together. You're going to be evaluating that. Your therapist, a good therapist, is going to let you know. They're going to say, hey, I think this is where we're at. I'm kind of anticipating this is the kind of challenge that we're talking about. I think it's going to maybe be this kind of length of time. We can reevaluate. Here's the milestones. Here's the markers. Here's the goals. Here's how we're going to tell that we're actually making a difference. And so it's every step of the way. It's not going to be a mystery, and you're also going to be, as the client, as the one receiving this service, you're also in the driver's seat.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate that, Scott, and I think inherent within the question and your response is we need to make sure people understand therapy is not an endeavor where people are going to be dependent on their therapist either. And a good therapist, yes. an ethical therapist, is going to foster independence and that the client's solving their own problems. So if there's sort of therapy that's in perpetuity where it's going on and on forever, that's okay. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's totally an option for people. I even recommend it for maintenance, kinds of things. And we really want to make sure our clients aren't dependent on us at all either.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's something where, in a lot of ways, I think that I've described it before as kind of like a do-it-yourself project or something like that, where it's, for myself, I am not a handy guy. So that's kind of part of the backstory there. The genesis behind switching from engineering to psychology was kind of, there were signs that this is maybe not the right field for me. I remember my dad tried to teach me to unscrew something with a butter knife, and it was just, it's not in our blood, but that's okay. We have other skills. And so if I was to try and say build a deck, I'm actually extremely confident I could do it. Mm-hmm. I'm also confident it would take me the duration of my natural life, that it would take me just far, far long, or alternatively, I could contract with a professional. But that's a discrete project. And so that's why I think, a lot of times maybe people think it's going to go on forever is they maybe aren't even sure what it is that they're trying to accomplish. And that ambiguity can kind of lend a little bit more of that mystique to it. Mm-hmm. But you go in, and some of the first things you're going to do is you're really going to be nailing down or determining what are our goals? What is it that we want to work on? What do you want to work on? And that's where I think it really helps kind of differentiate from, hey, I feel like I'm doing well. There's not any particular change. I'm more in maintenance mode. It's more getting an oil change. Mm-hmm. Great. Or, you know what? There is something I would like to change. And then once we achieve that change, you're welcome. Happy to see you go. We really are. We're trying to work ourselves out of a job.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that, because I was going to say that too. That was like one of my favorite phrases to use with clients. Even if I can't tell you exactly how many sessions it's going to take, I want you to know that as your therapist, I am working myself out of a job with you. That's my entire goal with it. It's going to vary, right? Depending on what we're treating, what approach we're using. But there are so many treatments too. They're incredibly time limited, and that's the whole point of it, right? And you can still see so much progress and benefit from that time. Yeah. Great. How about another myth? Let's throw another one out there.
Let's do it.
Okay, Scott, why should I come talk to you when I could just, go down the road to my friend's Bob's house and go tell Bob everything I need to about my life?
Great question. So,
especially a nerd self-described.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, at first I wasn't sure what kind of myth we were busting there. You're like, Scott, why should I come talk to us? There's so many reasons. Man, I don't know.
We only got 30 minutes, right? Here. Yeah.
Talk about the Hobbit all day long here. So, but no, so why talk to a therapist rather than talking to, Bob down the street kind of a thing? And, to be honest, I would say go talk to Bob. Absolutely. Go talk to Bob. Go talk to your friend. It's one of the things that is so critical to mental health and just our well-being humans, we are inherently very, very, very social creatures. And so I think that, the idea of therapy, it's not intended to be an either or a subtractive kind of element. Again, it's kind of more of that, all right, you and your buddies could get together, do a project, or you could have that professional come in. And the professional, what they offer is they're a professional. And so there's going to be a wealth of knowledge and experience. It's going to be a situation where maybe if you're confronting something, you kind of hit a snag. Okay, what do we do here? I don't know. I've never seen this before. But if you have someone who's been doing this for years and years, and they do this for a living, and they've been trained, and they've worked under people who've been doing this for decades upon decades, then ideally they have seen this before, and they're very familiar with what to do. They know exactly how to handle it. And so that's kind of that advantage of you go and see a therapist, and okay, this is someone who really does, ideally, know what they're doing. Now, beyond that, there's a few other distinctions where a therapist has a particular advantage versus Bob. And so one of the ones that's foremost in my mind is that they are not a part of your life. Bob, you might have to see at Christmas. Bob, you might have to see on your blog. Bob, it might be awkward to talk about some of your innermost, deepest, most embarrassing, most, those kinds of things. You share that with Bob, there's sort of no escape, a little bit. I mean, you can move, but other than that, it could be a little bit tricky. A therapist, however, there's that fantastic ironclad confidentiality that makes it so that you can open up, you can spill your guts, and you can say things, put your foot in your mouth, and just, admit those things. And sort of similar to, confessing to a priest sort of situation, you go ahead and you share, and that it's safe and that it's just between the two of you. And so it really affords you that opportunity to go and delve into those things that you honestly might be afraid to even say out loud. You might be afraid to acknowledge to yourself. And so here's a place where you can do that. And then third, I would say that a therapist, it is deliberately, it is statutorily a unilateral relationship. So what I mean by that, statutorily unilateral relationship, it is that your therapist is your advocate. Your therapist is there to help you. It is not a two-way street. So you are absolutely protected from any kind of, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And, your therapist kind of like, hey, I've sort of helped you out, so why don't you help? No. So we do not go there. We cannot go there. We do not want to go there. And so because of that, it protects you from any kind of, imbalance, so to speak, where it's very much because the nature of therapy, the nature of confiding is inherently very, very vulnerable. And so because of that, it's just nice to know that your therapist is going to be seeking to benefit you and not benefit themselves, which is something that the best of relationships would be difficult to maintain that, whether it's a spouse or a friend or a family member. We love family, but if we open up to family, invariably, especially because if they're a part of our lives, they're going to be impacted by you in a way that your therapist is not. And so there is that little bit of sense that you can't really control of, oh, well, if I do this, how is that going to affect them and how are they going to feel about that? So that objectivity is kind of that last element and that one-sided nature of protecting you. So that's why I'd say just kind of offhand some of the biggest benefits that jump out there. But what do the two of you think?
I think Bob's never going to be a professional secret keeper like a therapist is, in particular your therapist. That's the whole point. And it's a big part of the therapeutic benefit of going to see somebody to talk it through in that private space.
And what I find when people go to Bob, we're just really throwing Bob under the bus here.
Poor Bob.
Nonetheless, when people go to the Bobs in their life, the type of feedback they get is somebody telling them what to do or trying to give advice to them. And that's really contrary to what therapy is about, too. Therapy isn't about giving advice and telling people what to do. In fact, one time I had one of my clients was leaving and said, I so appreciate coming in because you always give good advice. And my heart just sank to my stomach. And I wanted to get defensive. And I just said, tell me about that. So what advice do I give that you find helpful? And I was so relieved. He said, actually, you've never given me advice. And I think that's what happens with the Bobs that we go and talk to is, well, they should, I'll say it nice and slow, should on us.
Which we have talked before.
Yeah.
We're saying should, so do not, nobody try and bleep us out. But those statements that we hate, but we will be more likely to get those from somebody who's an acquaintance, a friend. You know, let me give you that advice. They might be speaking from their own experience, but their own experience might not be what's helpful in your particular situation.
So we're feeling out of control in something in our life. We go talk to Bob, and Bob tries to control us as well. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, don't you think, some people go to therapy, and because they don't want to take responsibility for their lives, and they're just going to go and have Bob tell me what to do.
Well, I think the other side of it's true, too, actually. So I like that you bring that up. I think that there are some friends or family where maybe they've been burned, where you have gone to them, you have shared something with them, and they gave you advice, and then it didn't work out, and then you put the responsibility on them, right? Or you know,
right.
And so then because of that, your friends or family, Bob, might be reluctant to give advice. But if they're not telling you what to do, then I think that a lot of people, it leaves them in this place, this impasse of, what do I do? If I'm, you know, you're literally asking me, oh man, what should I do? And it's just, why, you know, I don't want to give you advice. And I mean, you got to figure that out for yourself. And I support you, but you know, that's really a question for you. And therapy is a context where, we're going to support you. Correct. We're going to absolutely preserve your decision-making autonomy. But we're also going to not just support you, but we're going to help you to kind of process some things and unravel and figure out and challenge and confront and develop in order to navigate, okay, what does my best self making my best decision at my most empowered, what does that look like, so that you really are in the driver's seat? We're really just kind of helping you to be the best that you can be as you pursue what you want to.
Good. Let's do another myth. How about this one? Only people who are weak, or my least favorite word, crazy, need therapy.
I mean, I bet that is actually true, though. No, not at all. No. So, that's a great myth. That's one that, you know, I will say, I think that has over time progressively gotten better and better, that there is a definitely increased understanding, increased sort of cultural penetration of the idea of mental health, and that it's extremely important, and that it really is, it's a gradient, it's a spectrum. And that while absolutely there is a reality to, you know, mental health and to, I wouldn't say crazy, but to, you know, psychoticism, and that there are certain diagnoses that are more severe, that are on the more severe end of the scale. But that is going to be something that, you know, we also have winter blues. We also have life is tough. We also have things like global pandemics, and that maybe it would be nice to talk to someone about the fact everything is crazy right now. And so people are not crazy, but the world sure can be.
The world can be.
And so that's where I think that this idea of, and I don't know if, you know, some of it might come from a little bit of a sort of, you know, Western American kind of cowboy mentality of there's something wrong with you if you need help. And I would say that it's more, there's something right with you if you're connected. Right? And again, that goes back to human beings. We're inherently social creatures. And you know, it's fascinating. I think about how in prison, one of the worst things they can do to you if you are misbehaving is they put you in isolation. And I think that says a lot just about the human being, that in prison, you know, if you contemplate who your social opportunities are, that the worst thing they can do for you is to isolate you from other prisoners even. And so I think it is so profound how much we need each other. And so therapy is a context where really it's not about being crazy, it's not about being weak, it's about being human. And so the ability to have a safe and protected and professional relationship where you really can connect with another human being. Because I think it's easy to forget that therapists, we're human beings too. And that's honestly, for all the talk of, you know, experience and training and all of those things, which are very important, and, you know, laws and being regulated, very important. The greatest thing that we as therapists bring is our humanity. And so it's when you have that person-to-person, human-to-human connection, that's where the magic is. And that's empirical. That's what we've found repeatedly where the strongest and most powerful change and transformation comes from. It's from that human relationship aspect.
Mm-hmm.
I think you really, let me just speak for myself. I really resonated with what you said about sort of this imprisonment. And it's a good analogy of how many of us are imprisoned in our own pain. Mm-hmm. And it actually takes a tremendous amount of strength to admit that I'm weak as well, or that I'm vulnerable, or that I'm sad, or I've been hurt.
That you're hurting.
Yeah, and because we don't have the strength to admit that, or the pride that prohibits us from doing that, we are kind of like in solitary confinement. We're isolated, imprisoned in our own pain. And that's why I have so much respect for my clients, because they're addressing really scary, horrifying things that have happened to them. And there's tremendous strength in that. There's nothing weak at all about that. But yeah, there's this imprisonment that happens to us where we are isolated in our pain otherwise.
Yeah, I really like that you're bringing up pain, because that kind of modern conception, or not modern, but that thought of, if I'm strong, then that means that, I don't need help, that I'm not in pain. Mm-hmm. Not being in pain is not a function of strength. That's being calloused. That's all that is. That's being unfeeling, being unmoved, being like, that idea of like, oh, I'm like a rock. And if you really think about that, I don't know that I would want to be a rock, because rocks don't feel, they don't move, and I would rather be human. I want to feel. I like the fact that if something incredible happens, that I'm able to be moved by it. I'm able to feel. I'm able to have passion and enthusiasm, or deep sorrow, or grief, or joy, and that's the stuff that makes life worth living.
That's a really good point. When something incredible happens.
Yes.
Now, when something incredible positive happens, what's our natural inclination? Is to be social.
Right.
We reach out.
Right.
Yeah. But when something incredible that hurts is we kind of clam up, we isolate, we become calloused. Mm-hmm. It's a really good point.
And yet when we do connect in the midst of tragedy, there's such a profound sort of satisfaction, wouldn't be the right word, but there's something going on there when we suffer together, when we go through trial. And anyone who has been through a difficult time and had the courage to reach out and to connect, you know what I'm talking about, that there was just something that was amazing about sharing your grief and sharing your pain with another, and it forged a kind of connection that is, it can't be imitated in any other context. And that's strength. I just kind of circle back real quick. I think that strength is all about doing hard things, right? I mean, if you look at ideas of strength or power, they have to, even if you were to go into the physics equations for these things, they have to do with movement. They have to do with creating change. And so if opening up, talking about pain, if that is difficult, if that's a heavy lift, then to be able to do that, lifting something heavy, that is strength. And so I think it's definitely something that we don't need to be embarrassed or ashamed about. It's just a part of the beauty of what we're capable of.
So that actually kind of reminds me then, even thinking about the next myth that I think is another big barrier to someone even just being able to take that first step into the door and into the therapist's office, is that, well, if I talk to somebody about this, all that's going to do is just make things worse. Yeah. What do we think about that myth?
So immediately, it's interesting when you say that, a picture pops into my mind, and it is of a closet, right? And so this idea of not talking about things, it's like, all right, what does that mean? It means that we are stuffing it. It means we're stashing it away. And so, storage closets have their role and they have their purpose, but the problem is what we're storing is not benign. If you have something that you don't want to look at, so I'm metaphorically, I'm thinking maybe it kind of is gross. Maybe it's kind of messy. Maybe it even smells. And well, what is that? Well, that would be what we call garbage. Those would be the things that we don't like. And so we want to throw them away. So we have these wonderful devices, these receptacles, garbage cans. And so, you throw things away and then you keep a lid on it. And, I've got to be honest, it works. It works fantastically. then you can live your life, you ignore it, you don't see it, you don't have to deal with it, you don't look at it, and your home doesn't smell. But what do you do with it? Mm-hmm. Right, at a certain point, you sort of have to confront it. You have to take out the garbage. So imagine what would happen if you did not take out the garbage, because what's the point? It's not going to do anything. So you just take that bag of garbage and you throw it into the closet. Fantastic. Now you can do that again and again and again. And very rapidly, I think, the metaphor sort of writes itself. Eventually, you cannot stop the stink. It just it's going to sit there and ferment. And so, you'll start to notice it. The people in your life, your guests, the people who live with you will probably notice it first. They'll go, "What is that smell?" We just don't walk over there. I don't know what you're talking about. And so, we get this kind of nervousness, this discomfort. We're embarrassed, and we just kind of try and move along. And so it really is a bit of a situation of pay now or pay later. And as in most things in life, whether it's bills and debts or banks and everything else, it always costs more when you pay later. And so that idea of, it doesn't do any good, just ignore it. It's going to build up, and you're going to have to pay the piper eventually. And the garbage will be a lot more messy the more that you have stored up and the more you've allowed it to just kind of marinate.
Which kind of goes back to the previous myth about courage and strength versus weakness. It doesn't take a weak person to admit,
right,
I got to deal with this and I got to stop avoiding it. That takes strength. That takes courage. And there is weakness in actually avoiding talking about and addressing these things.
The easy road. It's taking the easy road. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's, I love what we're doing here, what you guys are doing with your podcast, because I think it's you are allying in a sense, or you're kind of coming alongside too, because it is hard. And so sometimes, if people struggle with that, to know that there is support to encourage you to be able, because maybe you can't take out the garbage on your own. That's the beauty of therapy. Mm-hmm. Maybe it is too hard, but you don't have to do it on your own.
You don't have to. And it reminds me of our previous podcast with the story of Vicky and all that was going on in her life. Yep. And she had recalled 3 years ago what her life was like versus today. And I think it really was a great example of, I can't stuff anything in this closet anymore. Mm-hmm. It's just coming out sideways from every crevice. And there was a tremendous amount of courage and strength that she exhibited.
And importantly to know with therapy too, there are 2 potential responses to your first therapy session, and they are both equally valid and normal and okay. One might be, I open my closet and I immediately feel better. Mm-hmm. The other might be, I immediately open my closet and I feel worse because now I'm seeing all the garbage. But then I like to remind my clients, but if you stick with it, it will get better. But both are potential options after seeing a therapist, and totally normal to see.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, and I kind of want to take a moment to validate almost all of these myths, because they don't come from nowhere.
Right.
And there's a grain of truth to all of them. Mm-hmm. And so what I wouldn't want is for people to get the impression is that, if they have these fears, they have these concerns, it's because they have the wrong idea. Because honestly, a lot of these myths, they come from actual experiences that people have with therapists. Mm-hmm. And so for everyone to understand, you're not faced with the choice of either not getting help or getting help and just having to believe that your therapist, who's the expert, knows what they're doing. So you just kind of like, come on, they know what they're doing. Just play ball and stop being afraid. That you really are, as a client, you are empowered. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, with that garbage thing, I think that there are absolutely clients where their experience has been, they go in for therapy and they look at the garbage and then they don't do anything. And in therapy, all they do is they just sit. Mm-hmm. They just sit in the garbage. They don't actually take it out. Mm-hmm. Or they go to therapy and their therapist just kind of checks in on them. It's just like, let's just have a conversation about all the things that make me feel bad. And then they say, okay, well, see you next week. Mm-hmm. And then you wash, rinse, and repeat. And so that's where I think a lot of these things come from, is the reality of some of these things. And so I want people to feel empowered that you have every right to ask your therapist, to ask the questions and say, okay, I listened to this podcast, and so I decided to go ahead and seek out therapy. Nice job. And so, but I want to know, if we go into some of my trauma, if we go into some of this stuff, what are we going to do with it? Are we just going to talk about it? I want to know, how is this going to help? You are absolutely entitled to ask your therapist, where are we going? How are we getting there? What are we doing? To ask those questions. And your therapist needs to be able to answer. And if they can't answer, that's totally okay. And you should totally get a different therapist. And so it's something where that conversation where if your therapist can't tell you, here's what we're going to do, and here's how it's going to help, and here's the change that we're going to, and we're going to do it together, then that is something where you're absolutely not stuck in. And it's just like any profession, right? Whether it's a medical doctor or a lawyer or the contractor who's building your deck. You should have questions for them. And if they can't give satisfactory answers, then you are absolutely entitled to then find somebody else who is, and it's not even necessarily that they're bad answers, but maybe it's just not a good fit. And so, but we don't want people to think that if they have a negative experience or they hear about a negative experience, that means the entire profession is like that. And so I think that's really, really important for everyone out there to feel empowered, to be able to advocate for themselves and to say, hey, what are we doing here? Because there are good answers.
You know, this actually kind of reminds me too. We probably all saw the show Mythbusters when it was on. And of course, by the end, they would always be like, well, we have to either like say it's busted or not busted. But there were so many times where it was like, does it have to be so black and white? Right? They were able to like either like, okay, there's some pieces of that truth or there's some pieces that aren't. And I kind of see that's what we're kind of doing with these myths as well, too, right? We're taking statements that are pretty black and white. Right? And we're just like we do in therapy, too. Can we see where the gray is instead? Yeah.
I like how you did that, too, Scott, which is really what we do in therapy is we like to lead with validation, and we do like to see change. But we lead with that validation, and I really appreciate how you validated the myths. And that they don't just happen out of nowhere.
Right.
And I think that's important. That's a great example of what we try and do with therapy, because things have happened to us and we even say, this just doesn't make sense, or, you know, it's my fault or whatever. And we can lead with a lot of validation. So I just thought that mirrored what we do in therapy pretty well.
All right. We got time for one more. Should we do one more?
Oh, boy.
All right.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, let's see. How about, I think this will be a good one to wrap up on. My issues are not that bad. Therapy should really only be safe for people who have it worse than me.
You know, it's interesting. That is literally something that I've heard recently in the past couple years. I think that's become much more prevalent in the context of the pandemic and or pick your crisis.
True.
And it is something where I've had people where they feel guilty. They feel bad, honestly. Think, this isn't that bad. And I'm taking somebody's spot and the need is so great. And especially as the stigma has gone down and as the cultural awareness has increased, that there's more people who are seeking help, that this idea of I'm taking somebody's spot and my needs aren't that great. So shouldn't I just kind of tough it out? And I think that there's a few responses to that. One is I really appreciate the humility. I really appreciate the concern and the compassion for somebody else. That's great. Underneath it, I have to ask the question: is there a devaluing of yourself? Is there an element there of I'm just not that important? And to that, I would say, yes, you absolutely are that important. And so, you are completely, you are 100% worth getting help. And there is no issue that is too small for it to be worth you receiving support on. And I mean that. There is no issue that is too small. Because here's the beauty of it. If it's very small, it will be very quick. And so if you go in and you're like, oh, this isn't a big deal, fantastic. Then you're going to be out of here in no time flat. And if you're not out of here in no time flat, what that means is that maybe this is a little bit bigger, a little bit more complicated than you realized or than you wanted to acknowledge. And that's okay too. And that just means that you're exactly where you're supposed to be. So I think that this idea of, it's too small, right? It really does. It kind of takes care of itself.
Yeah.
Well said. Well said. So it's really everything under the sun. It can be something super intense. It can be something that feels really trivial. And either way, it's something that can be addressed in therapy, and your life can be better. It can be enhanced. And if your life can be enhanced, why not go for it?
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be trivial to you. And for sure, if you're coming to me to want to talk about it, it is not going to be trivial to me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The last thing I'll say on that is kind of the tried and true go-to of the airplane analogy of when the oxygen mask falls.
Yeah.
Put it on yourself first before you try to help somebody else. And so, even if you're thinking, this isn't that big a deal, you're still not at 100%. You're still somewhat compromised. And so if you're genuinely concerned about others, and this isn't some kind of, I'm not worth it, and I don't think I'm an important person, but you're thinking, no, I understand that I am, but I just honestly let them go first. If you get help, you're going to be so much better equipped to help others. And so it really is, it's not just about you in that sense then. And so it really is an opportunity for you to be at your best, because we truly are all in this together.
Well said, Scott. We really appreciate you being with us today on the podcast. And I think you've given some really compelling and encouraging reasons for people to go and pursue therapy. It can be a real game changer for the better for people. And we hope for everybody listening that you do have a greater sense of understanding, openness, and eagerness to go to therapy, because it can change your life so much more for the better. And Scott, we thank you again for being with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you guys coming out.
Yeah, and thank you to all of our listeners. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast for more episodes coming out every single week. We will talk with you soon.
Thank you as always for listening, and please be sure to leave us a review. While this podcast can't be a replacement for therapy, we hope you enjoyed our discussion today and join us again next time. Nystrom & Associates is always available to those who are struggling. If you find yourself in need of support and help, please check us out at nystromcounseling.com.